Welcome to Carl DeGregorio's Desk Session 89, the number. Another summer, sound of the funky drummer, quoting the great Chuck D, Public Enemy, fight the power. Not going to get off on that rant. But 89, we are at Desk Session 89, Carl DeGregorio here. Again, working on how this is all going to go anywhere, go somewhere. And it's a lot of firmly held beliefs that I am now re-examining, reassessing, and coming about face, swinging all the way around, coming to the port side rather than the stern, thinking about the left hand versus the right hand, thinking about art versus commerce, thinking about change versus stasis, and discovering day by day things that work for me and don't. And I guess because change was forced upon me, which is not how I would like to feel about being proactive. I'd rather be proactive than reactive. And so when inevitable change presents, like it has for me, there are a few small instances of using that as a hint, taking the goddamn hint, taking the hint when it's your life, when it's not from another person. I think that's maybe a wink, or what you would call an answered prayer, or what you would call a divine intervention. It's not always divine intervention, meaning you win the lottery, or sliding doors, you meet the love of your life. It can be something jars you to change, and then hopefully you take the hint. You understand the places where you're stuck, and I guess that's where it's at for me. And also doing the checking what songs are what and what was last week's and going into this week's. One of the big changes that I know I need to see, or one of the big realizations that I've had, it's been a cumulative thing, is about exposure and art, and being a performing artist, a writer, an actor, a comedian, any of those things. I probably erroneously believed for a long time that it was about exposing yourself, not in a filthy way, but in a way of showing your heart. Sure, but showing your heart as an actor through the character is more like it, and probably not where I was for most of my life. I have been autobiographical in most of my work. The play I produced in New York was semi-autobiographical, but it really wasn't. It had a very fictional structure on top of it. And it was more revelatory to me because of that I was able to be idiosyncratic to my performing style, my speaking style, but I had other characters and a scenario that was crime-ridden and not of my experience. It was set in a bar, so it was like write what you know, but not autobiography. And then I wrote a book, which was, autobiography. And stand-up wound up being autobiographical for me, and it took a toll and left me bereft in many cases. And I'm sure I had jokes that were just observational things, and I had one-liners, but much of it was because I learned somewhere along the line through whatever was out there in the ether about being a comic, who the people around me were that they culled from their lives. I didn't want to be, I knew Anthony Jeselnik right before he took off. We would frequent an open mic, and I'd see him around, and he was going to be a one-liner guy, and some of those jokes that he used to tell, I still repeat there. That's why he's become the success he is. But he was a very diligent joke writer, and because he was a one-liner, like in a 5-minute open mic set, he could do 30, 40 jokes. Whereas I was up there literally trying to cull some exposing truth about myself up there, as if it were, I guess, almost like a therapy session. And what this is winding up to be is more of a vlog and truth thing or babbling thing than me talking gossip or talking about current events or even talking about current events, movies, things like that, where the pod has its own structure, and when personal anecdotes leach in, that's a good way of making the host relatable and speaking truth to sort of speaking truth about yourself, and having the art that you're discussing be the conduit for recollection, and for the listener saying out there, I relate to that, Sonny Corleone is actually, he's the whole cliche, or the shallow read is that he was a hothead and his temper got the best of him, but he was a very loyal and strong leader, right? So, I mean, you learn, you hear, you get other people's takes, but I think, and rather than have it be a rebuke of my former self, because hopefully we're always evolving, I have to find a way to move forward and with the wisdom gained, if I can call it that, and how it's going to be different, and how knowing this much about myself. And I think an artist's path isn't to expose themselves necessarily, although that is some people's idea of art. Not mine any longer, even though really I draw from my own database of understanding. But I think there is a path of understanding yourself that an artist must take, but that can become self-obsession, and that's where depression can start to become, in many cases, and maybe even in mine, a personality trait. And certainly when you're up on stage talking about struggling as a comic, I am just reaffirming that this isn't going the way I wanted it to go. I'm exposing to the world that I had higher expectations, and I'm currently not meeting them. And that's bad structure, if you will. And self-deprecating is, I guess because maybe my early heroes were, for pure comedy was Woody Allen, and, these sort of talk shit about yourself, bag on yourself, but you find out a lot that he was not really, he was telling on himself maybe about some proclivities, but he was such a joke writer that people mistake the delivery system for the person. The reason he plays that character is because he's not a very rangy actor. He's very good at that, but he's not a very rangy actor, and everybody thinks that Annie Hall, that he plays a self-deprecating. He's not self-deprecating. He's an egomaniac. He has too high an opinion of himself, and things like that. And so, but I had to, and again, everything has to be through this filter. Unfortunately, maybe I have to free myself of that. But this filter of playing both sides of everything. That, let's just say this week, my girlfriend pointed out that you can't do that to yourself. You can't play both sides of everything because you'll never make a decision, right? So, and how right that is. And I've had to learn the hard way. And I would probably lean toward staying put rather than making a change. And that has to change because I got places to go, and I have to confront whether or not I have the stones to do it. And I've put my money where my mouth is. I just need to do it again. And to be honest with you, if I even, revisionist history could, when you're thinking negatively, could be things went badly, but they mostly went well, if I'm really being honest. And I don't want to recap those fears preceding good things happening. But nothing is in 100 percentile. So I have to step out on faith and understand that in many cases, my refusal to take stock, or my refusal to be gracious to myself or to the situation or to the world at large, or, where judgment comes on others, that's not a good indicator of your own feelings of yourself. All these all these processes of trying to work shit out. I think take a stand, take a stab, and see where it goes. But I was about to mention something that I then backed away from because of a fear of the filter, taking things through the filter of how people would react to this. And now I've gone so far afield in my digression that, we're no longer talking about, I was talking about Woody Allen and how he was self-deprecating, but that is actually a misnomer. And it also leads me back to a story of my Carnegie Mellon days when I was lucky enough to, I think I mentioned the story, get my first equity show was in my senior year. And it wasn't even the second semester. I think it was the first semester. So I got this notion of being a professional actor while still in school, getting an equity card, knowing I would be ahead of the pack, at least as far as being able to not have to sweat it out somewhere in New England or something to get an equity card. I had that in hand. I was very lucky, very blessed, and I got to do the show, and I got to have, not the kind of money you could live on in the real world, but definitely the kind of money that made it, I felt flush for a few months there because it was a fairly long run, and it gave me this identity as like the actor with the hot hand. Now, there had been some actors in previous years, many years, that there was enough going on in Pittsburgh that they'd get cast in films and stuff. And in one instance, the part was big enough the guy had to leave. I know there was someone in a class below me. She got cast in something and then took off, and you'll see her on TV all the time. And so these very self-determined, self-directed, very talented people would come through and kind of have this certitude that I don't need to be here per se. I'm going to be here for now, but out there is where it's at. And so I kind of felt like I was kind of jumping into that reality of being one of those, up and comers already, And the part I played was a simple person. I don't know if the person there was no diagnosis of it being a person of special needs, but the person was a sheltered, low confident, kind of Italian version of a mama's boy. Obviously some family trauma there. He was very unsure of himself. He was shy. His family reflected that he may be too sensitive. And it was a love story, and my brother in the play, he's the one who got over on the girl that I was after because he knew how to make the approach, and I was too shy. And so it was a heartbreaker, and there was, it was like a very cool play about family, Italian-American family, working class in Pittsburgh. And I remember at CMU, the box office is kind of a big deal because in Pittsburgh, you have Civic Light Opera, you have Heinz Hall, you have the Pittsburgh Public, you have City Theater. This was at City Theater, but also people get subscriptions to the seasons of dramas and comedies and musicals at CMU, and and there were people on campus who would come and see our studio theaters. I don't know, I'm sure there's a million different little I'm sure these buildings aren't there anymore, and that there's plenty of opportunity to see them. But as the internet, you see that sort of students in other departments would populate our audiences, which would be what a cool thing to have an open heart about that, use that resource to see plays and stuff. And so the box office was often a place where people would get their work-study hours. When there were plays, you could get work-study hours being an usher. I think we had comp tickets, or I remember there was a class above me that was so talented musically that, their production of Chorus Line, I wanted front row and I wanted center, and I knew that about that show, and so you would always and it was in one of the buildings we had a lot of classes in, and so people whose day job and only job was to be the box office manager, and they knew what they knew, and there's probably gossip and things like that, but getting in that play was some bit of a discussion, and people would see it, and faculty would see it and tell me great job, and not everybody in the department would come, would have the time, or there was a competing production I had to beg out of to be able to do the production, so a lot of my classmates weren't able to see it. But this employee of the box office, saw it, and she said, and again, this is where I went on the digression. And this is the problem with being judgmental, prejudging yourself, pre-estimating the opinion of the critics. And this is the change I have to take, is whether it's pertinent, whether it was true, and if it makes a point. And also in my one-man show, which is very autobiographical, which now I'm starting to rethink, you're going to have to, it's not going to be 100% approval, right? So I have to live with that and be strong enough. But the reason I'm even doing it is because someone said something nice to me, but it was also a veiled compliment. So I'm in the box office hanging out, talking shit, whatever it might be. Someone said, "Hey, I saw the play at the City Theater. You're really good, but this is the kind of person we're talking about. But your character was such a loser and you're such a winner that I didn't buy it, essentially." And I thought, in my hypercritical, cocky, overconfident mind, not wanting constructive criticism, just pretty much wanting worship and status, is what I think was at the heart of it, which is why early success may have been troubling to a mindset like mine, because maybe I still wasn't out on Broadway, so maybe some constructive criticism from an audience would have been taken with a grain of salt, but also put in the hopper for. And she was basically saying she just couldn't buy me, because she knew me personally, that I was sort of my character wouldn't have struggled with, and like I said, it was a compliment to me as a guy, but almost an insult to the fact that I couldn't pull off playing a dweeby loser. And if you think about, there were some exercises I thrived in, and these are things you don't know about yourself, right? One of the text analysis things, which you got to be careful of, it's just a way for people to justify degrees, and there were classes like text analysis, like that could help your acting. The most brilliant analysis of a play and your character will not turn itself into a performance necessarily. It won't hurt. It definitely can't help somebody who doesn't already have, right? There are two tracks. There's the intellect and there's the experience and the visceral emotion. So it gets very convoluted and very tricky in the academic setting, and then you have to sort of somehow find a way to break habits and be more instinctual. And hopefully you take other classes and you learn other techniques, and that's why I loved improvisation so much, is because the intellect was sort of guiding, but also it was what was coming out in the moment, and that was not necessarily a heavy predilection at CMU. But the point I'm trying to make is that in text analysis, they tell you to find out what other characters are saying about you. And these are, you hear that from the professor, and you're like, oh, that's a great idea. So you go through the play looking for, like, they say he's lily-livered. Okay, so that means you're a coward or whatever. But that's also a good indicator in life, right? So I think I'm just an actor. Maybe I have whatever low self-esteem, or I have issues, insecurities that we all have. I don't share the insecurities, because to be open like that means I lose status. So I wouldn't always share them. And then people were seeing something that belied my own feelings of myself. And so when somebody said, I didn't believe your character was such a loser and you're such a winner, that was someone saying something about me to me, but it's what other people perceive you to be, where you can learn, right? And if you're lucky and blessed, and whatever sort of nature versus nurture, or where you grew up on the map, and what kind of things befell you in your awkward years, you aren't, it's not too far off. Or you would say something about that to yourself, or maybe like I said, I don't think the character had special needs. He was just shy, and I think you can be. And even in the reviews in the paper, they were saying things like handsome but shy, or sheltered, simple but handsome. And so that was, I don't know if it was a miscasting or her opinion, essentially, and one out of a bunch, right? And instead of sort of being, or, which maybe, and now I know, like maybe I could have, done something different with my hair to make it look more goofy, or, and you're playing a character, you're not playing yourself. But I was so, and have often been so enmeshed, I guess would be the word, with there being no separation between the art and the artist, and it's not the requirement. And so I say all the judging things that made me not want to share this tidbit is that I didn't want, this thing of a humble brag, right? And again, this is the disease of social media where everybody's walking the same beat, and there's a collective, it's not even unconscious now, it's a collective consciousness, and a lot of it's negative, and a lot of it is as many videos of people dancing like no one's watching, but it's being filmed. There's 50-50 people saying, oh, I wish I was that free, and then other people going cringe. And we've talked about cringe and cringe worthy and things like that. And if an actor's afraid of being cringe, then they're sunk. And I wasn't afraid of being cringe. I just thought maybe I was just leaning into showing range and showing ability that I maybe didn't play to my assets, And part of drama school that makes you fucked up for the rest of your career is that you can play anything theoretically, is what they're after, but you can't once you get into the casting world, because you have physical attributes, limitations, too tall, too short, not blonde, not angular, whatever it might be. You can't be all things at all times. So, but your range can expand, say, in voiceover when you're not confined to your physical being, right? But again, this all came down to the fact that I probably should have taken that compliment and ran with it, because if I was so entwined, and I didn't write it, and I was just an actor, and I was just too wound up. You can imagine this without any sort of work on yourself. I probably made a big stink about her, like she fucking said it, and people either did or didn't push back, or I wouldn't hear, but she said that you're too studly to basically play the loser in the play, but I got the part, and I didn't understand why that critique, and maybe that was her being a dick, and I don't know. But one of the exercises in class, and I don't know how there are a lot of improving scenarios, doing games and shit like that. A lot of the stuff that people make fun of in movies about actors, and some of that stuff is painful, but some of it is revelatory. Maybe 30 years later, which is coming to me. But there is a notion of status, high status characters and low status characters. And this would come in handy in the Shakespeare, in the classical texts where, which you like to think it's different now, but it isn't, but where there were kings and servants, and there were, soldiers and generals, and the society and serfs and all that stuff that is in the canon of classical theater texts. Miss Julie, right? She falls in love with the stablemate, and Jean, and that's a great play. It's like practically a two-hander, and it's about the classes and lust and status and stature. But the status game in the theater sense is that the funny thing is to find out that characters can be high status, but not in title, and not in like in Commedia dell'arte, the king can be a befuddled buffoon, and his underling is the high status person. And so we would do these improvs, or do even scenes where we'd flip flipped the statuses, and a notion came to bandy about in the discussion of how that scene went, how that scene didn't go. There was a discussion at that time that I ultimately defaulted to high status, and I don't know if that complimented me. I didn't find it to be true necessarily about what was going on inside, but again, it doesn't matter. Like, what comes across is really the litmus test. And for me, not understanding that they weren't critiquing me, they were critiquing a performance, and that seemed to be a compliment still. But if anything that it's the damned if you do, damned if you don't. It's the idea of not being able to take a compliment, to be so sure I'm right, so sure people are out to get me, that I didn't take the note. And so then when I heard that I was defaulting to high status, which would mean, and this is what I'm bringing it up today, because forget about 30 years ago. Today I have to face a change I've made in a good way, hoping, risk with all decisions, and how I'm going to rebrand and regroup and reassert, and how I'm going to reassess and sort of figure out this stuff that has to be crystal clear in order to connect with the casting director, to connect with the part. If high status is, that would mean the types of roles, right? So it's just the way it is, right? John Savage, a great actor from the Deer Hunter. He plays the poor bastard who gets married in that long sequence in the beginning. He can't hack it. He needs help. His wife apparently sleeping around on him before he gets married. They go to Vietnam. He's the one who breaks down. He's the one who loses his legs. It's sad. It's a heartbreak. It's Vietnam, laid bare. So he would be, and he is in other roles since then, he's very good at playing low status characters, meaning like broken men. He plays with a lot of passion. He's got a lot of fire in the belly as an actor, but he's a low status. So if they all read for the same parts, it would naturally configure, and that wouldn't be an indictment on John Savage. And then De Niro, he plays the war hero. The Deer Hunter is De Niro, right? He's the alpha, and it just, they do that a lot in casting, is they mix and match the parts, and inevitably you get put in high status, low status. But then in drama school, they want to break those things that are easy. So then they throw you into low status things to see if you can be malleable. And ultimately you can't, or ultimately you can, and it's something to learn. So if I may feel a certain way about myself inside, I'm not that tall, but I'm over 6 feet tall, and I guess I was all my life. And so a lot of times you were the tallest guy in class. So, I can't imagine what it would have been like for Kareem Abdul-Jabbar or Wilt Chamberlain. But like, you don't want to be, the last thing you want to be is singled out for something. So there's often this thing to not want to recognize your stature. And in Shakespeare and in Commedia dell'arte, there are archetypes and body types. And so in Midsummer Night's Dream, the little sprightly Ben Stiller would be a great Puck, who's the sprite. Or he would be, I think Ariel is a female, but it could go either way. But Ariel in The Tempest, there's literally an archetype of a gymnastic, smaller statured, more agile person. And then me would have to be Prospero, or, play Oberon, But one of the things that makes me sort of, what I'm trying to do is repitch myself, because I'll just put it out there. I've changed agencies, which is a big thing, and not such a big thing. It's all kind of crazy at this point, but I have to reconceptualize for this person who's worked with me before, but wants to figure out a way to sell me to casting directors. So I want to also have, and the cool part of why I jumped ship is I get to collaborate on this, and I get to have a say so, and we all do, right? And it also can be, you can get in your way, and you could have a misinterpretation, and now I have to think about new pictures. And so I'm bringing this up in real time, kind of deciphering high status, right? After a certain point in time, you're not the young guy anymore, so you're gonna play somebody's dad, you're gonna play somebody's boss, you're gonna play the captain in the detective squad, you're gonna play a coach, you're gonna play, a burnout at the office. So you could play befuddled but still high status. But so, and these aren't bad notions, and so I'm trying to participate in crafting the way I'm to be sold. And so you come up with comps, actors who are ahead of you in the food chain that you could play their part or play their brother, or if they were to say no, or how would you get a casting director to bring somebody in, is these antecedents or these comparisons, which are, and you tend to not be, I tend to be self-deprecating in these things. I used to do a joke on stage that I was a cross between Tom Cruise, get a laugh because I'm clearly not Tom Cruise, and then I'd say, and Walter Matthau. So they would get a laugh if you knew who that was, and then you think about it and it's pretty dead on. But then I call a buddy and I'm like, hey, who's your headshot photographer? And he's like, yeah, you should do that. You're dope. You should. And he's saying nice things, and that's a good friend. And then he drops a name of an actor that is considered a kind of heartthrobby, and I want to argue with him. And that's what I'm talking about. It's not me. Do you know what I'm saying? And you're too exposed. And this is for any actor, anybody doing anything. It's not me. It's not you. They're not your mom. They're not your dad. They're not the coach who put you at the end of the bench. They're just people trying to find an actor, a slot, or an audience is just there to be entertained. They get something out of what you put out. And so you're allowed to keep it to yourself, your processes, and you're allowed to keep your counsel, and you're allowed to be open to hearing how you're perceived. And to the degree that you can change anything is another thing. And that's the theme, I guess, is change and about face. I've done a few things. First of all, life intervened, and I don't currently work in a restaurant, which was a thing I've been begging for, praying for, to not have to do that stressful work, beating my body up. I haven't replaced it yet, but I have this opportunity now, which is an opportunity I haven't had in over 20 years, which is it's a scary time, to be honest. When I came to LA, I had $2,500, I think. I didn't have a place to stay. I didn't have a job. I had just done my play in New York City, which is about like a tree falling. I used to joke about I did a lot of tree falling in a forest theater, way off Broadway. And so it was a leap. It was a long time ago. I was young enough, resilient enough, but I was past the age where a lot of people would have already settled down. I was a late start, in comedy. And then I picked up comedy as a way to be more proactive, for it to be about getting up and getting out there and working on new shit, as opposed to, but it did take me far afield of acting. And then, things stepped in, and, this is why money and your nest egg and your war chest have to be, I had friends who would come out and say, I got X amount of dollars. And I'd say, before you come out, try to triple that, try to double that. And they'd say, what do you mean? And I'm like, it wasn't so much that you would run out of money, which it would be. It was how long the money would last, because of how long it would take to be able to chase down these opportunities. So I had some great fortune right at the beginning, because I came to crash with a classmate, and they were working on a big network TV show, and so they had a little cachet, and they were opening doors, and I was meeting people, and they were socializing with casting people, and I met agents, and I read for things were like lining up. But the minute I ran out of money, or the minute I had to get put all my money down on an apartment, I needed a job. And I needed a job in a restaurant. And this restaurant wanted to train you for 7 days or 2 weeks of like desk work, like learning about seafood and oysters and it was like going to school. And guess what falls by the wayside? All that you can't learn your lines. You can't, it just took, and that was just to get to the point where I could work and then have it, and so all I'm saying is I have this opportunity to do new headshots with a plan, with a collaboration. What are we looking for from a marketing standpoint, and also, a chance to, redirect it, and a chance to understand how I did it hastily, and to change, basically. And I even hear myself, I say I hate doing headshots. Well, I don't have the luxury to hate that. And guess what? If you hate it, you avoid it. You let them get out of date. You let them not be what they could be. You are finding a way to set up that they're gonna fail if you're not gonna attempt to have a good time. It's awkward, so I guess when you start talking to people, or no one's doing phone calls anymore. The best set of pictures I took, I wonder if she's still doing it, was a great photographer in New York called Tess Steinkolk. She was at the high end, and she was like, she was so upbeat, positive. She blocked out a day for you, or she made you feel great. And that, boom, these pictures come out. This is going back a long time. And so, you need to find that collabo. I would go path of least resistance. I had a great photographer. I've seen him twice or 3 times because I know what his studio is. I know where he's at. We catch up. It's like a friend vibe. And yet I don't do what am I going for? What are the clothes? Things like that. I have to do it a whole different way. So that might mean doing something else. That might mean getting all my clothes in the trunk. I hate schlepping clothes more than anything. But that vagabond, gypsy sort of caravan, that Shakespeare Company vibe, that's the life. And maybe I didn't want to do it on the road as a comic, but I mean, it's really not that big a deal. You pack your stuff up, you roll it over, you have your looks, and you go for it. And so that's a bit of change. I've changed that. I've changed... these are simple things, but I think I've mentioned it, and like I said, I've changed who cuts my hair, because I get into these, I consider it consistencies, but a lot of other people would call them ruts, or staying in one location, one coast, like not shaking it up. And so from change comes some good things. Now, switching agents it could backfire, but I can't worry about that, and ultimately most of the things and most of the leads and most of the things that you book are self-driven. They just answer a phone for you. So if that's not going to change, then it's just somebody else to answer the phone. And then if they can be value added because they're going to hustle because we have this thing, and that's what I have sort of run to. And again, not having any bad feelings about the other, it's just literally, trying to facilitate change and to understand that, again, an artist's role is the art, not self-flagellation, not self-exposure, not to seek love. There is a Instagram page I follow. I think it's at Muscle Music. I don't know the woman's name, but I relate to her material, her content, because she's talking about nervous systems and how but a lot of the actors she works with are people who are not very well regulated, that their need to perform comes out of some kind of catharsis, that it comes out of some kind of trauma response, that they were drawn to this, and that use me, choose me, like they say in Chorus Line. And that she says is that's not at all what it's about. And I've even helped my sister out. She sings in a choir. She had a solo. She said she was nervous, and I told her the same things that I've discovered this woman proselytizing, which is if you're nervous or you're worried about it, then you're actually putting the attention on you, and the attention needs to be out there, and it needs to be you need to assure the audience they're in good hands, that the song will be sung well, that you've prepared so much that you can't be nervous. That's what they say about great virtuoso musicians, that you have to, the 10,000 hours thing. It's probably even more than that, because it's not that you won't make a mistake. It's that you have to play it over and over and over that you can't make a mistake, you know? And that's what, you know, when you do theater, when you do, you know, there's not to say that they don't mess up in Hamilton, but I bet you they don't. You know? And it's not unforgivable, and that's not what nervous system regulation is. But she talks about that fact that, you know, it's not a place of trauma. It's a place of, the audience comes to you to feel. The audience comes to you to tell them how to feel. The audience is there for you. You're not there, and you're there for them. So that's the deal back and forth. But if you are dysregulated, if you are nervous, you make them uncomfortable. And that's not what it is. You go to see a master class. You go to be hugged by the work, by the art. And so if I have to look at it, if it's just self-referential and I'm trying to have a moment that they can see me, it's that. But the story, everything has to hold itself up so that the audience can just relax and watch. And any of the self-esteem issues that come up have to be sort of quelled, or whatever her process is. And I'd be interested, you know, money being part of the issue, but like, you know, I'm sure she's doing some kind of good work. I think she comes from a conservatory background, a lot of singers, a lot of musicians, actors. And so what I've realized is that the self-driven material, i.e. stand-up, writing a book, when I'm doing the material, if it's not based on fiction, it is inevitable that it will hurt to be critiqued, because I am putting not only my heart on the line, but I'm putting like my choices. You're being asked for discernment, maybe not judgment, but for discernment. And so the stakes are too high. And if I couldn't take a compliment saying I liked your show, you did well, but I kept thinking you were too much of a winner and you were playing such a loser, that shouldn't be destabilizing to hear. And that's why now, as I've shifted back into acting, that is what the script not being written, that the job is different than stand-up. It's different than even doing the one-man show or a book. I am not the progenitor of the material. I am a conduit and an interpreter of it, which gives me the veil of fiction, which is probably the solace I sought when I went into acting, that there was a relief of wowing people playing, like, you know, the kind of, I was the idiot that I would go to these forensics competitions and I saw that everybody was playing all the characters. I was just doing a monologue, but I was doing a monologue from Requiem for a Heavyweight, and I'm 15 and I'm going, and it, like Anthony Quinn did it on TV or in the movie, and Jack Palance did it. You know, I'm playing a guy who's a washed up fighter, and I'm 15, and the critiques from the moderators were like, you know, really well done, but, you know, it's hard to believe. And I was drawn to this darker, deeper material. And then I did Death of a Salesman as a two-hand. I did the Biff and Willie scene with the rubber hose, and I would do both but other people were doing like Midsummer Night's Dream. They were playing all the characters, or they were doing like the Gettysburg Address as a monologue, you know, or they were doing like a big showboaty monologue. And eventually I settled on doing Hamlet, which was more in my age range, being 16, 17, and I won, you know, I placed in the competition and got a plaque. So, and then was lauded for having an adult comprehension of it. You know, usually you can be 35 and play Hamlet, but I was obsessed with it. And, you know, it was the relief. And I don't know who said it. I wish I knew, because I know a lot of people who have overwhelming emotions. One thing about acting that made them calm down, that Their emotions are, because the script tells you, okay, it may be a heavy scene, but you know exactly when it's happening. In real life, you don't know when you're going to get hit with an emotional trauma. You don't know when bad things are going to. So if you're an anxious person, actually being an actor, no matter how heavy duty it's, because you know where the emotion. And this is different than, you got to stay in the moment, et cetera, et cetera. But you're having somebody else's argument with their mother. You're not arguing with yours. When you're doing Hamlet and Gertrude, and you can really give into them. And that is like a way to test drive emotions without the real stakes of it being your life. And that there is some, and I think I misunderstood that. I always envied painters, and like I never wanted to be a fly fisherman, but I was always enamored of like people who had tactile art to do, because you could just disappear and zone out and get into that Zen thing that I get when I play ping pong. But you can get there with acting too. You have to stay present, but it's a whole different thing, and it is an escape in a way. And so I think that's a new direction to sort of face with it. And I bring this up also because now I'm at the point with the song, and I have another story about the song. Last week's song was Dream On Dreamer by the great Brand New Heavies, which was, I remember their first album on my Walkman when I was going. I had to take the bus to the south side of Pittsburgh and go to rehearsals and to go to the run of the show, and your tunes were everything, and it's cold as F in Pittsburgh, and I'd have my Walkman on, and it was the Brand New Heavies that whole year bumping that fucking album. But Dream On Dreamer was last week's. And this week's is a winner. It's an odd one. It's Marlena on the Wall by Suzanne Vega. And it's the album before Luca. Standing, Solitude Standing is her second album. That's the breakout. That's the one, My Name is Luca. And that one also has Tom's Diner on it. But this is the album before that. And I have no idea how this came across my my siblings were out of the house. I was doing my own thing. It was the height of like Springsteen. But I also hung out with these college age guys, theater guys. And that must have been where it came across. Or I had, older girlfriend who was in college, she was like 4 years older than me. So it must have been that. And I was just trying to show I was hip. And so I got hip to this first album, which has this, I guess, a modest hit. Like Marlena on the Wall was the big hit. And it's an incredible thing music can do, and which is one of the most immediate aerosol, if you will. It's like it's like a chemical warfare for the emotions. What music can do, it literally, you can get a song across your path, and it'll bring you back to the past, or it will at least conjure that feeling. And then if you're lucky, which is what I think the beauty of these playlists and talking about this shit is, you put a new spin on it, because if you put them back into rotation, you can transform the nostalgia and just sort of be like, what a great song. And that's kind of where I'm at with that. And, when I've done my meditative walks, I'd walk in the park a lot. Before I hurt myself, I walked a lot, many miles. And I'd hear a playlist. And so sometimes you just sort of, you can do it on Pandora or whatever, but they make a playlist off of a song you randomly select, and then it makes similar artists. So I think I bumped into Marlena on the Wall on somebody else's dime on a playlist, and it's almost rap, because she's a folk singer, Suzanne Vega. I think I hope I've shared her name so far. Suzanne Vega was born in Santa Monica, grew up in New York, which is kind of cool. I'm in the reverse of that. But it's a wordy ass folk song, and as I'm sitting there on a park bench, and I don't know if this gets into copyright. So I mean, but it's like off the dome. It's like, even if I am in love with you, all this to say, what's it to you? Observe the blood, the rose tattoo on the fingerprints on me from like that. I hadn't heard the song, thought about the song, played the song, done the song, and as I'm sitting on the bench, I could do every single syllable of it, which is, you know, you've seen these hack memes about Gen X. Can't remember what they came into the kitchen for, but they can remember every lyric to every song from the 1980s. Understood. But it was a big thing, and then it wound up on the all-time playlist because I was just sort of, that whole album, it's like very spare, and it's got a song, and this will be how I wrap it up. So Marlena on the Wall is the song. I will put Dream On Dreamer by the Brand New Heavies on from last week's, and you'll have to look up Marlena on the Wall, or I'll put it up next week. But there's another song on that album called the Queen and the Soldier. And this is another long, like 8-minute song. And I had a cool teacher in high school who, it was psychology was the class. It was like an elective. So if you were like in it had, I was kind of on an advanced track in language. So I had these open electives, and I guess everybody gets electives, but by the end of college, high school, I could take a lot of electives, and I took this psychology course with this very young hip teacher who's since become a minister, and she was cool as hell. And on Fridays we could sit around, and maybe it wasn't every Friday, but it was like once a month, we would sit in a circle, and it could be like a sit around and talk thing. It was like a perfect break for our angsty teenage minds. And it was either a question and answer, or it was just a way to talk. And I really loved it. And I was verbal and dominating, and I just loved every bit of it. And you got to know people. And then one day she said, everybody bring in one song. We're going to play the song, and then we're going to go around the circle and try to guess whose song it is. And some people were really accurate because we knew who their favorite art. Like I knew a dude who was like a huge AC/DC fan, like and I was trying to do a pump fake, and again, we didn't have access to all the songs, so it had to be something you could bring in, and I wasn't going to go to the store to bring in. It would have been very clear if I chose the song Fame, which is maybe on this all-time list, the Irene Cara song. And then everybody would say, oh, that one's definitely Carl, because I was an avowed actor at that point too, right? Getting all the leads. And so I played this Queen and the Soldier, which was a deep cut, a long-ass, boring-ass song. And no one guessed, and I just they're like, oh my God. I was just trying to play to the sensitive chick in the room, whoever it might have been. And it's this long story about a soldier and a queen, and I guess it's metaphorical, and it's it's about him like fighting for his queen's honor, and it's just some crazy thing. And I don't know why it appealed to me, other than like the massive lyrical content, and even Marlena on the Wall would have been a better choice. But I bring that up to say that part of my yearning for being an artist was to be heard, to be discovered, to be found, to be nurtured, to be loved. And that's not the role of entertaining, and that's not the role of presenting even. It's to be you're the official in the room, you're the regulator. You're the one who calms the nervous systems of the room. It's leadership, to be honest. And that's something that I now understand. And maybe through the help of everything I've gone through and being finally able to see it differently. It's not about showing off and it's a million different things. And I guess if you're lucky enough to stay in it and get some proficiency and hopefully we got some new momentum, and then maybe, when and I'm not saying I'm there yet, but like when they call somebody a master of their craft, it's the proficiency of the technical skills in music or of voice and of acting, or it's the mastery of the role. But I think it is really that you become the person, the leader, the one who can assure the audience that I know what the fuck I'm doing. and I'm not neurotic, and I don't need the playwright who already, they cast you. They gave you the role. They are putting costumes. They already think you can do it. How much more affirmation do you need? Now it's time for you to do them a solid and deliver their story. And to be the reason you were cast is you present as this person. And that's why I hope, art will start to understand that about themselves, artists, that we have to be leaders, because we're getting smoked by commerce, and we can still make some money too, because you should respect yourself enough to not take scraps. And so I guess that's the change. Change is the big topic. Fighting the good fight and trying to fix your own misinterpretations. And that's part of the process. And so change is rough. Change is hard. It'll give you sleepless nights and stomach aches, but you got to do it. And for me to be able to say that is, right there, it's a progress. So I'm going to take that into the next week, and hope you can do the same and crank out on some tunes, and see if you got the leadership thing going on for yourself. All right, peace.